This conversation is with Georgios Tserdanelis, who is the VP of Conversation Design Operations at JPMorganChase. Georgios has bags and bags and bags of experience designing conversational user interfaces. He's been at it for more than 15 years, prior working at startups like Cigna AI and large enterprises like Cigna and Walgreens, currently VP of Conversation Design Operations at JPMorganChase. And this is a great conversation for both people who have been designing conversational user interfaces and AI applications prior to generative AI, and also those who've been getting into it after the launch of ChatGPT. So GenAI native designers and developers, as well as traditional machine learning NLU people who are also trying to get more experience in building GenAI applications. And we cover in terms of conversation design best practices, AI design best practices, as currently being referred to as. What are the hallmarks of good experiences? How can you use the hallmarks of real conversations in your AI applications to make experiences better for users? We talk all about how to do that, and also the role of AI in businesses and in our lives, really in our personal lives, and how design, in terms of designing those interactions, is going to become a hell of a lot more important. There's a lot of attention being focused on just getting AI applications out of the door, which has led to a few problems, one of which I call the full stop problem, which we can link to below if you want to learn a little bit more about that. So essentially, we're in a world where applications are just being deployed for the sake of it. Just to functionally work, and we don't really have a good eye on and a good grasp on design best practices in this generative AI world at the moment. However, those design best practices and standards do exist and have existed, and people like Georgios have been building and designing effective conversational AI solutions for many, many years. And so this is a conversation and insight into that bags of experience that I'm sure you're going to learn a hell of a lot from. So without further ado, here is Georgios Tserdanelis of JPMorganChase. All right, brilliant. Georgios, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks, King. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, this has been, you're one of those people that I've been following on LinkedIn for a while. Obviously, we've met a couple of times. You were gracious enough to come to the Umpires Conference. And so always keen to hear what you have to say, always keen to read what you're posting. And you're someone who's kind of been in this space for a long time. You've got a lot of experience. So I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
No, absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. Finally, we're doing this.
Yeah.
I've been following you too, and great content. Amazing.
Fantastic.
Amazing stuff.
Thank you very much. Well, the content is largely, and in fact, the majority of which is because we have great guests and great people that come and share their stories. And so, appreciate the time. Maybe it'd be useful for those people tuning in that are not familiar with you, that haven't met you before. Maybe explain a little bit about who you are, what you do at JP Morgan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a linguist. I always like to introduce myself as, once you go all the way for the PhD, it's like you're branded for life. So I started out in linguistics. So many years ago, I thought I would stay in academia, but things happened. I ended up joining a startup in California back in 2009, 2010 called Voxify. And the rest is history, as they say. I started working on something we called back then VUI, voice UI user interface. Another term that in the industry we keep using is IVR, interactive voice response. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been making my living as a IVR VUI designer, so mostly focusing on voice. I've been going between startups and large enterprises as a subject matter expert in conversation design. And we all know how this field has evolved, especially in the last 3 years. But after my time in the Silicon Valley, I joined a large enterprise in Chicago, Walgreens, the pharmacy. I spent some time there, and then healthcare, Cigna. Then went back to startups. I kind of like missed the back and forth between the large enterprises, millions of calls and chats versus like innovation and smaller companies. I joined Avamo, which we did a lot of work with healthcare again, mostly chatbots, and Skip.ai, which were an interesting it just, when I was at Skit, ChatGPT came out. So that kind of like changed everything. But there's a tough use case. Collections calls for delinquent accounts, calling the customers, not customers calling in, but calling out, which was interesting. And then last year, I decided to go back again in the large enterprise space, and I joined JPMorganChase as a conversational AI, we call it now, designer lead for the bank, for Chase Bank, which is probably the largest bank in the world, certainly the biggest one in the States, millions of customers, 500 million calls a year or something crazy like that. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
No
Talk about volume.
No pressure then.
Yeah, no pressure there, exactly.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of good companies in there. Cigna, we've done quite a bit with Cigna. We've had Cigna on the podcast. We've done webinars with them. They're doing, not as much as 500 million or whatever it was that you said calls, but they're doing like 72 million or so, all going through voice, which is really good. Obviously, everyone's familiar with Walgreens, I'm sure. Avamo, I don't think we've had Avamo on the podcast actually, but very familiar with the technology and stuff like that. So you've obviously been around kind of in the right places, so to speak. And it's interesting how things have evolved, I suppose, in that time. So there's a lot of people now who are getting into AI after ChatGPT, after 2022, and almost for those people, AI is generative AI. But you mentioned VUI design. Obviously, when I started this podcast, it was all VUX, voice user experience design. It's almost like VUI design, then VUX design, and then it's conversation design, and it's all that kind of stuff. But how have things kind of evolved for you over the years of kind of like designing voice user interfaces? Because it's coming back around again now. It's very prominent now. Everyone's interested in it. So how has it evolved over the last 15 years in terms of automated voice AI?
Yeah, absolutely. 15 years is a long time. I think the earth-shattering event happened when ChatGPT came out. What was it? End of 22, beginning of 23. Mm-hmm. But before that, everything was basically scripted. All the experiences for customer service applications, which is the area I'm working on mostly in my career, whether it's banking, retail, healthcare, like we talked about. Was all scripted interactions. Basically the bot had to, faithfully, play back whatever the designers and the content writers wrote. That evolved slowly, very slowly, until a few years ago. For the most part, the telephony, I've been working on the telephony space, a little bit on text-based chat as well. But the telephony base, when I started in 2009, history lesson for the young kids out there. It was mostly touch tone. You had to call the company, airline, bank, what have you, and make a choice over the keypad. Back then, iPhone had only been out for like a few years. There were still a lot of cell phones with actual physical keyboards. So it was interesting, the touchstone screen. But the touchstone, right, slowly evolved into natural language understanding, NLU, which was, again, more of a deterministic classification of intent. So what you wanted to say, we called it directed speech, like a dialogue interaction where you can say checking, savings, and so forth. So very few things you can say, or and a combination of the two. You can say, pharmacy or press 1, photo or press 2, and so forth. So, and believe it or not, that's still around, but it has evolved, especially in the last few years, with more of a generative AI approach, which is, yes, we have the deterministic rules-based interactions with a caller, with a customer or the user, but we're starting to inject a little bit of that, large language model understanding of classifying intents, somebody in your recent podcast, or maybe you call it a God box or a God prompt, like, how can I help you?
Yeah, that was Joe from Druid, yeah.
I'm here for you, my son. How can I help you? Right? So the God box, I like that term. That's the new approach. So I think for the most part, the business processes remain the same. When people call a company or, for some service, and I always say that it's like, the majority of the callers are already negatively predisposed.
Yeah.
And we can talk more about that, in terms of like cognitive psychology and human conversation expectations, which, you talked about contextual factors too. That's a hugely important one for the telephony space. But just to cut it, the long story short, the last few years, we're all experimenting with the new technologies and try to see how a conversation design and the traditional role of a designer who owned the experience from greeting to goodbye is starting to like outsource a bit of that experience to some of these new tools, which are frankly amazing. The large language models, the transformer technology. As a linguist, to me sounds like magic. I spent most of my PhD years, doing like, trying to determine the rules of grammar and how, people construct sentences and understand meaning and, the pragmatics and discourse markers and all that. And sometimes I use ChatGPT and I'm like, talk about the Turing test. I mean, that's like way behind, right? It's, I'm having a better conversation with ChatGPT sometimes than I have with like my best buddies or my family. It's insane.
Don't tell them that.
No.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way of explaining the scope of conversation design. You mentioned owning the experience from hello to goodbye. And what's interesting is that, we went through a period, I suppose, in 22, 23, where the term conversation design, even now really, there is a lot of debate about conversation design is dead, to use the phrase, Right. And I always said it's not, because you're still having conversations, you're still designing conversations. It's just that the LLMs are taking on more of the dialogue management. But even that comes with problems, I find, because LLMs don't inherently understand some of those linguistic components that you mentioned. What is a discourse marker? What do you do if somebody kind of like has a pre-sequence expansion before they ask a question? LLMs are very eager to just jump to the point rather than bridging the gap. There's a load of things that LLMs, to the untrained eye or ear, seem to do brilliantly, but in the context of an actual conversation, they tend to be a bit too eager and they don't really understand. So it's really interesting to hear your scope of what a conversation designer does. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, have you found that still the, ownership of the experience in JP Morgan, is it still called conversation design? Has that changed? Like, how has that evolved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we still call it conversation design, and I think that term has, in terms of like when I look at LinkedIn at job postings, it's starting to change a little bit towards more like a AI experience designer or something like that. But when you actually look under the hood, it's still the back and forth interaction with a caller or a user of a chatbot, which is still, grounded in the fundamentals of human dialogue, right? So you cannot take that out. You can replace it with AI, you can put, LLM, GenAI, or what have you, but it is a dialogue interaction. There's a back and forth. There's a turn-taking event, which is not found in any other channel, like a website. You can just look at it forever. It just sits there, right? But not a voice assistant, a virtual assistant. Even chatbots expire. You have to log back in and everything. So sometimes web pages reload, but that's a different thing. But yeah, it is changing. And I'd say that, going back to my comment about, hello to goodbye, and I had to like make sure that all the paths are mapped out and everything. I feel like, and maybe this is more of a controversial position that I have with some of my colleagues, I think actually AI, the Gen AI and this ability to not script everything, not, control everything in terms of like feeling, I'm going to lose my job. They don't need me anymore. I feel like this is actually an empowering tool as a conversation designer. I can actually, like I said, maybe outsource is not the right term, but have a helper in the experience where I had to like make sure, like, you talked about pre-expansion. You talked about like, a caller calling and say, I have a question, for example. And he's like, okay, well, the bot would say, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. You can say blah, 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 right? That's like the traditional thing. And then I have to make sure that, maybe I add that utterance. I have a question in the grammar and then, decide what to do with it. But training a model, especially with like we call it prompt engineering, or you can call it like, guidelines that you can instruct the LLM, the GenAI bot to behave a certain way. It can actually do a much better job than a human writer can write all these different responses that you could use in a certain context. In other words, making it easier to focus on like delivering the answers, the value that the caller. Like I said, most callers are frustrated. You don't want to play around that frustration. You want to actually guide them to a solution, an answer. Another of my favorite things to say, especially when talk to junior designers, is that a lot of customers would rather have a bad robotic experience that gets them the refund than an amazing, pleasant experience that the bank denies them the refund. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about your money, or about rebooking a ticket or what have you. What's more important? It's like, it could be a robotic voice, a Stephen Hawking's voice that gives you the $200 refund versus an amazing, Matthew McConaughey, who's like the voice that just joined 11 Labs.
All right.
Denies your refund. It's like, oh yeah, I do like Matthew, but I want my $100 back.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if I could use something like that, it would make me more of a power, designer, a powerful designer than before, I think. Bottom line is that I feel confident. We're not there yet. I'm still learning, like everybody else, how to use these tools to enhance the designs. But I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think what's interesting, and Braden Ream mentioned this the other week, which I thought was really interesting and insightful, is that prior you used to have the conversation design component happen first, which is all of your mapping out of the process and your dialogue design and your NLU modeling and all that kind of stuff. And then that would go into development. And the goal is that the build matches the design, and then you have the testing that comes afterwards. And that lends itself, this is not what Braden mentioned, but he called out the fact that the design, development and testing process was separate. And I think that lends itself to a more kind of waterfall type of approach. It's difficult to be agile when you've got siloed processes to build something. And then what Braden elaborated on, which I think is an interesting insight, is that what generative AI does is the prompt is the function and the form. So it's bridging the gap between the design and the development, because in that prompt you are instructing it in terms of how it should sound, how it should behave, what to do if you don't understand somebody, how to repair a conversation, all of that kind of stuff. But you're also telling it, if this person's bank balance is below such and such, then do this. And if this person's asking for an overdraft extension of X, but they, have never repaid any of their credit card bills, then do, what I'm saying? So you're explaining the what it should do as well as how it should do it. Right. So I wonder what your experience is in terms of that component in bringing the design and the form and the function closer together.
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question in terms of like, how can we do that? How can we bring those together, with all these different, amazing tools that we have now? And there's a ton of vendors that everybody's working with that they have, they're adding even more and more powerful tools to our disposal. In my previous company, Skid.ai, we started using, some of those models, like I said, for collections, outbound calls, right? So in terms of like instructing the bot how to behave, with a caller on the other line, that it's even a worse use case, because when you call a company, at least you have an intent. You're like, you already, maybe you know what you're calling about. Sometimes you don't, you're a little vague, but when you're receiving a call, the onus is on the bot, right? So how do you instruct that virtual assistant to behave and adapt to the caller expectations? Like even the simple things like, am I talking to Kane? Am I talking to Georgios? Right? And those expectations, could be, you can listen to live conversations between humans, and you can see how those mapped, and you can feed them into the model. You can do, a little bit of small language modeling, RAG, and everything like that. But there's always the unknown, and always when we write kind of like the sheet of instructions on how the assistant should behave, and even when it should just hand off to like more of a rules-based deterministic flow and everything, things are not still 100%. That's why I think from what we hear in the industry, like not a lot of the Gen AI solutions have been deployed facing especially large enterprise customers, right? So there's like that uncertainty. Like to give you an example, let's say, okay, we have 99.9% accuracy with only 0.1 hallucinations, or for a company like Cigna or JPMorgan, 0.01% means millions of calls. They could go down the wrong path if you have 500 million calls a day. And maybe it's acceptable in some scenarios, maybe in research, but not when it comes to like handling your money or your health appointments or other very important things. So you gotta be sure that when these things are deployed, which are coming, I think I'm predicting that within the next year or so, we're going to see more of a Gen AI, solutions out there facing, large customer bases. But the functionality may be limited in terms of like where you can let that 0.01% of like unpredictability seep into the experience, So it could be fine if it's an FAQ question. Maybe it's not 100% accurate. Maybe things change. But when it comes to like moving money, for example, around in accounts or rescheduling a very important appointment with your physician, there's no room for variation there. You got to make sure that this is happening, deterministically. And we're not there yet. I think it's gonna happen. We're just working out the details. But as a designer, again, going back to your question, the point is that when I write a description of how the assistant should behave, it's flipping a little bit the narrative from like actually scripting the dialogue like a playwright. When you write a play, this is what Ken says and this is what Georgia says and blah, 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 to more of like a director's notes on how to describe the scene between the actors and the context, the background, the setting, and everything. Which is, again, I think it's more empowering as a designer. Like I feel like I like my job the last 15 years. I think I'm gonna like it even more now because I can do that maintain a persona, the personality of the assistant, take into account context, history, memory, all that stuff that it was so hard to do before. Back in my Voxify days, 2010, 2011, we would spend so much time into like making sure we had the right response and like recovery, repair, all that stuff. It was taking weeks and weeks to have an assistant that could do that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's revolutionizing the role of a designer now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the role of a designer, you mentioned there that prediction would be that there's more Gen AI solutions at scale. I definitely concur with that. I also think that I don't know if next year might be a bit soon, but I think there's definitely becoming an appreciation of the role of design in generative AI applications, because similar to NLU, in the early days of NLU, it sounds as though Walgreens and Cigna were probably a little bit ahead of their time in bringing somebody in to look after the experience, because most companies, typically, their first iteration of an NLU solution is essentially function over form. Just make it work. And I think that's where we've been for 3 years in generative AI and agentic AI, has been just make the thing work, get it actually out the door and get it working. And I think that's led to a bunch of issues from an experience point of view. It's become a bit of a habit for me now, is whenever I come across a new deployment, I'm on there and I'm testing it and I'm screen grabbing it and it makes it into my next presentation or whatever, because it's like there's always some issue. And, one I come across recently was a retailer, and I asked it a very simple question: have you got any deals on jackets? That's something that a RAG solution should pick up on for most retailers that sell that kind of stuff. And it comes back and it says something along the lines of, we always have regular deals, check the website for more information. If you find a price somewhere else that's better than the price you can find here, take a screenshot and send it to us. If you want to, this is the words it used, if you want to, you can be escalated, right? That's the word it used. And then underneath it had a link to an article, the help article. There was 4 instructions in one response.
Yeah.
And that's from generative AI. So that's what I mean. People are just trying to get it working. And the thought about the user experiencing this thing is not even being thought about, because there's so many examples of where the experience is just so poor.
Yeah, we're trying too hard. We're trying too hard sometimes to leverage this amazing, magical, very articulate, new interface that we have now versus like the more like, primitive NLU menus and taxonomies that we had before, which I think we are putting the cart before the horse sometimes, because as a linguist, as a conversation designer, I always go back to the basics. Whenever I see these amazing new demos and prototypes from different vendors, and I'm like, well, like to your point about, noticing something, and I'm noticing even smaller things. Like I'm noticing missing an acknowledgement, going straight into like offering all these things, understanding what the caller says, which is amazing, but not offering like a simple okay or got it. And a lot of the product folks that I work with, sometimes they feel like, oh yeah, well, we get from customers, they don't like the fluff, they don't like all that verbosity. I don't like it either. But what I like is knowing what's going on with my conversation. And those little, lampposts, little marks, it's basic conversational grammar. If we want to use language and we don't want to use just buttons and touch screens, we have to abide by that. Otherwise, we're gonna ruin the experience. Even a little thing like I said, opening the floor, something like I have a question. And then the bot just starts spitting out options for you. Here's the things I can answer, blah, blah, blah. It's like, how about just like saying, okay, what's your question? So
go for it.
Because, like we're doing right now, like, and of course on the phone, we don't even have the video like we have now that I see you nodding, you see my hand gestures, Sorry, I try to keep my hands down. I'm Greek. I always gesture too much. But on the phone, you don't have those affordances. So I'm a big proponent of these little acknowledgements, the little words that continue the conversation forward and making it like one turn at a time, not like overwhelming the caller. I love ear cons. I don't know if you know that term, ear cons, right? Little things that happen. The closest equivalent is the 3 dots when we're texting on the phone. And if I keep talking more about voice, it's because that's my field. I have worked on chatbots before, but I think, and I always say when I talk to junior designers that if you work on a chatbot, if you work on a voice application, I can hire you as a chatbot designer, not the other way around.
Yeah.
If you only worked on chatbots, you need some more experience with like voice telephony, especially telephony applications. It's not something you can pick up from just working on a chatbot. So the tonality of an expression, and that's why I like the large language models, because they actually can adapt the tonality based on instructions and the content, the semantics and the pragmatics of the situation. Like if a caller gets frustrated, if you start using profanities, which happens all the time in call centers, right? I'm always amazed at the specialists at the call center and how they can handle that situation. I'm thinking it's like first responders sometimes, right? Everybody's panicking, losing their cool, but you can just, focus on the conversation, which I'll give you an example of a call I just listened to, because we do this live call listenings with a call center, which I always liked as a designer, just sit next to a human and listen to like a human to human conversation. I have a few more tidbits to share about that. First one is that contrary to what I told you before about the little acknowledgements and the okays and the got you, when the caller is really frustrated, maybe starts cursing at the specialist or whatever, you get the silence from the representative, the customers, the experienced ones, because they know that anything they would say, they would aggravate more the caller, right? You don't want to say, I understand, I got you, I really know where you're coming from. These things, we think that they might help at the time, but if you listen to actually human-to-human conversations, sometimes like a couple arguing, they aggravate the situation. Silence is gold at that point, which is counterintuitive to what I was telling you before. Sometimes I call and there's like these long latencies, like, what's going on? Just, just play some sound, something is happening, right? So I love that example because it's like you see how the context actually could determine, like we say we don't want dead air on the phone, but sometimes you do when you want to let the caller vent, right? The other tidbit I wanted to share, if you don't mind, is that I keep increasingly hearing specialists, customer service representatives sound more and more like virtual assistants. Yes.
How so?
And I know, and I made a comment to one, a brilliant, very experienced customer service representative the other day, and like, you know what? At first, I thought you sounded like, Alexa or Siri or something like that. It's like, oh, I get it all the time, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. It's almost like the expectation. We talk about making machines sound like humans. Well, to me, this is a case where humans start sounding like machines,
Wow.
And maybe because that's what, like how we adapt the way we speak, that in linguistics, we know about that, like the social interaction between speakers. If you like someone, you turn to imitate their speech patterns a little bit, or, converge in terms of like vocabulary, accent. If you dislike someone, you emphasize the differences. You start sounding more and more different.
Right.
You like emphasize the fact that I speak a different accent. I use different words than you. This is a, very common, research finding. And I think this is also relevant with like, human computer interaction. So, we're seeing this evolving now, especially with the younger demographics, right? I don't expect, an 80-year-old to change the way they speak, or maybe they do. I don't know. We're still collecting data, but definitely the younger demographics and the expectations of like what customer service on the phone or in the chatbot would sound like. It's dynamically changing. So
wow,
it's very interesting to see all these research findings in terms of what the customer expectations from these assistants.
That is very interesting because isn't it ironic how all of the companies that are producing synthetic voices are trying to make them sound as human-like as possible, yet the humans are starting to merge towards sounding a bit more robotic.
I know. It's anecdotal. I need to collect more data about that, but I think there's something going on there.
That is crazy. That is mental. I've never really come across that.
Oh, and just to interrupt, I did hear callers asking, "Are you a human?" to a human, and the human say, "I am a human." Again, because we always say, hi, I'm a virtual agent, here to help you. Like we always want to disclose that it's not a human on the IVR, right?
Yeah.
This is something best practice has been happening for a long time. Now the human agent has to disclose that they're a human. If you just say, hi, I'm Kane, how can I help you? Hey, Kane, are you a human? You have to confirm that you're a human.
Wow, that is crazy. I suppose so. Yeah, maybe that'll be part of the introduction. Hi,
because
my
the synthetic voices sound so good.
Yeah,
right?
they do.
You cannot tell the difference anymore. Yeah?
That's true. Yeah, I actually come across a case today where I won't name the company, but they've experienced essentially fraudulent calls into their contact center to order new parts for broken machines, and it's an AI agent making the call. And it's the humans have been answering calls, having conversations with AI agents, and these AI agents have essentially scammed the agent into sending out replacement parts.
Yep. Yeah, it's a huge problem, especially in the financial industry, banking. Bad actors, and fraudulent calls. I mean, they there's like we're talking about hundreds of millions of losses. On fraudulent calls, and there's a war between AI, right? There's the AI, the bad actor AI, and then our security AI, like liveness detection, voice biometrics, all that stuff that the industry is starting to. Not one thing works. You have to do a combination of things, right? Even if I recognize your phone number, I recognize your voice. Your voice could be cloned, right? Your phone number could be spoofed, right? It looks like, Kane is calling from the registered phone number. Sounds like Kane. Well, it may not be Kane. We still need a third piece of data, identification data to confirm, especially when you want to do something like move large amounts of money around, right? Or close an account or open an account and stuff like that. So it's a race between the technologies. Which is good because it makes the technologies even more robust. I'm not opposed to voice cloning. it helps, a lot of people, especially with speech problems and everything, the movie industry, and all that. But, at the same time, I don't want anybody to use my voice, or increasingly my video too, because, Sora and the other tools can create all these videos that for now we laugh, they're memes and everything, but give it a few more years, you won't be able to tell the difference. That the same way that, companies like 11 Labs and other companies can clone a voice to the point that unless it's your mother, cannot, your friends cannot tell the difference between you and and that clone voice, right?
And so, think about it from this way as well, is that, like, one potential not too distant possibility is that, let's say that you use ChatGPT and there's an agent component in ChatGPT that'll go away and do stuff for you. There's nothing stopping either a ChatGPT or an equivalent, or even a startup that comes out of nowhere, to allow people to have their own, essentially, agent. And how easy it's feasible today for there to exist a mobile app that, as part of the onboarding, you just record your voice and it clones your voice, and you can hook it up to your bank, hook it up to your, telecom provider, mobile phone provider, all that kind of stuff. And whenever you want to do anything, it will just trigger an agent to make a call in your voice, authenticated by your app, essentially, to do things on your behalf. And so it's not even that it's necessarily going to be a scammer. It might be that actually Georgios, next time he calls his bank, it's actually him, but it's a cloned version of him wanting to get something done.
Yes. Agent to agent, digital agent to digital agent talking, which I think I saw a meme that, if my digital clone, the digital twin, calls the bank to do something on my behalf, or the airline, why do they even have to use English? Can they just use binary code to talk to each
Why
other?
do they need language? Yeah, surely it could all be done by APIs.
Right. So the cloning of the voice is irrelevant at that point, as long as you have the security tokens to know that you are, interacting with a legitimate, representative of Georgios or Kane. That's good enough. That's probably, it's coming. And then the question again, what's the role of a conversation designer there, would become even more, tricky to answer. But yeah, it's people thought that the 1-800 number telephony customer service will go away with digital, the last few years. And again, I still make my living working on the phones. The iPhones came out, the iPads, the Alexas, and everything. Everything chipped away a little bit from the call center. But call center is still king. Like 90% of the interactions for enterprises are still the call center, because there's something about that conversational, language, spoken language, that is unique to that channel. There's something, we only invented writing, in Egypt 4,000 years ago, Mesopotamia, but we've been speaking for hundreds of thousands of years. There's something about speaking, even if it's to a machine, about how to express yourself, or, how to get something done, that is, the phones are not, and increasingly even younger folks start talking on the phone. Like at some point it was all texting, or they communicate with voice notes, which again, they have like such a, huge wealth of information, even just like the way you can say a simple word with the tonality and the prosody and the timing, the silence, all that stuff could, they say a picture is 1,000 words. A spoken word is also 1,000 pictures.
Yeah,
if you think about it.
Yeah. I remember there was a company called Canary Speech. I'm assuming they're still going, and they could they reckon that in 30 seconds of speech, or 3 minutes of speech, one of the two, there is something like 140 something different biomarkers that they can use to make predictions. And a couple of those predictions was the prediction of early onset dementia and the prediction of Parkinson's.
Yes.
Which is mad.
It's amazing. I love Elizabeth Stocco. I think she was at your, she's brilliant in the research that she's doing and how she's finding all these little social pragmatic discourse elements and conversations that, they make such a huge difference in terms of presupposition and expectation and grounding and all that. That, I mean, obviously, when I was doing theoretical linguistics, I mean, you can write dissertations about all that stuff and how, and when it comes to, like I said, I'm going back to my earlier point about why would anybody call an airline or a bank or, it's not just to have a good time, is you have, maybe during COVID, a few, lonely folks did that. And I heard sometimes that the customer doesn't want to get off the phone, just want to interact with someone. But for the most part, we have a problem, we have a question. And that's, it's such a deterministic, it determines everything that comes after that. I keep saying that the best customer service call is the one that never happens.
Yeah.
You want to prevent it from happening. Once the customer is calling the call center, it's not just like to hear, your branding messages and promotions and everything, is to actually get an answer to a question or solve a problem.
Yeah.
Which is not always the same thing we do in conversation, right? Even before we started this podcast, we did a little bit of meet and greet. We did a bit of the social interaction, how are you doing and everything that, that's for the most part is removed from these experiences on the phone or on the voice assistants, even though the latest Alexa release, I don't know if you're, using the Alexa, still the smart speaker, mm-hmm. It's starting to inject some of that with the different voices. Obviously they're the switch to GenAI and some LLM situations, which I found interesting. I used to, for years now, I've been using it for just simple barking out commands, weather, music, whatever. And now I feel like, hey, I can actually talk a little bit more about when I'm in the bathroom or whatever, with this system and have a conversation. Even the little acknowledgements and the little things that they were missing before or very robotic, they sound more natural now.
Yeah.
At 100%, sometimes sounds still a little bit weird, but it's amazing. That the smart speaker is not dead.
Oh yeah. I think it'll make a comeback. I still think that the ultimately the future of human computer interaction at least will become voice will be a primary modality. Whereas yes. I don't think that keyboards are going to go away. I don't think that screens are going to go away. I don't think any of that's going to change. I just think that voice is going to become part of the mix and table stakes. And actually, you mentioned Alexa. I don't know if you've used the ChatGPT's voice mode much.
Yes, I have.
It's actually
magical.
Really good. It is, yeah. And it makes you think I sometimes when I'm walking the dog, it used to be my podcast time, or I'll post on LinkedIn at that time or record a vlog or something like that. And recently I've found myself having a chat with ChatGPT about specific stuff that you mentioned there sometimes that conversations don't necessarily have a goal. There always is a goal that I'm trying to get to, but I almost use it as almost like a consultation type of conversation. So it's not reset my password, which is very much like there is a definitive outcome and all I've got to do is get through the predetermined process and I'll get there. It is more like a genuine conversation. I use it for stuff just strategy conversations and web design conversations and hiring conversations and all kinds of things like that. And it kind of makes you think as people start getting used to having that type of interaction and that type of dialogue, maybe conversation design will change a bit because, Jacob's law of internet user experience, which is that your experiences are shaped elsewhere. So when you arrive at, for example, JPMorgan's website, you expect it to do and behave how all of the other websites that you normally use work. Maybe the same thing will be true when it comes to conversations. So people might call up wanting conversations about what mortgage is best for them or what type of loan they might be able to get or how they should be saving for retirement and those things that are not necessarily process driven. They're more kind of like exchanges of insight on both parts to arrive at a decision,
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're raising a good point. And just to backtrack a little bit, when I said some conversations don't have a goal, the conversation is the goal when they don't have a goal.
Yeah.
Think of just calling a relative and just having empty chat on the phone, for 5 minutes, with no reason to call. Just wanted to hear your voice, right? Yeah. So there's always a goal in the conversation. And to your point about calling, your bank to just or the financial assistant, which a lot of these digital, versions of the apps now. And some of these chatbots have actually a voice button too. I think ChatGPT works that way. There's a little microphone that you click on it, and then you just like put your phone down and you talk to it, right?
Yeah.
So there's some convergence of digital and voice happening, telephony and the whole like omni-channel holy grail. But the FAQ questions so far, going back to my early days as a UI designer, FAQs were like, how much can we put there with the NLU if somebody, what are the types of questions they can ask, and then here's the scripted responses, versus like the new approach now, you can actually have multi-turn conversations, drilling into specific things that they don't have to be about, business processes and servicing and answering questions or moving money around or anything like that. It's about educating the caller. Like again, you're brushing your teeth in the bathroom. You want to hear more about, how the market is moving, or, what are the latest trends and everything. I used to just say, Alexa, play NPR or play whatever, and just hear the news, predetermined by the algorithm. Now, what if I can interrupt those news and say, well, oh, this is interesting. Tell me more about this, in the actual news bit that you're hearing on the NPR is the national, public broadcast radio here in the US. So that interactive, people talked about it in the past about interacting even with movies or TV shows or radio shows. But I think it's something that could happen now. Excuse me, especially with like, having a conversation with an intelligent assistant that can actually give you an answer that is not prescripted by, a designer or a content writer or a product person that may be even 5 years old. Like sometimes I call Cigna or I call Walgreens that I worked 10 years ago. I still hear some of the prompts I wrote 10 years ago, And I know some things will never change. It's about refilling prescriptions and everything like that. But other things like, the responses or, some explanation about, pharmacy hours or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this sounds like so 2014, we should, just like, like fashion, right? Fashion changes, language changes too, even the vocabulary we use. And, you don't want things stuck in time, frozen in time. You want these, and that's the brilliance about these models. Obviously they use all our data, and I know data centers, the planet, energy, climate, and all of that. That's another discussion, but they are evolving systems. They're not stuck in time, so that's something different that, it's new. I mean, we all talk about, the future of AI and all that. Excuse me. But yeah, so there's a parallel I wanted to bring up that I forgot earlier. We talked about the smart speakers and AI now and all that. People forget the revolution that happened when telephones became ubiquitous 100 years ago.
Right.
In the 1920s. Not 2020s, 1920s. Some people had telephones even before then, but at some point, I think it was the 20s or the 10s or whatever, everybody got a telephone. So the question back then, and if you go back and do some research, which I did a little bit, everybody thought is like, how are we going to talk on the phone? Like, what is the etiquette? What is the expectations? Like, how do you greet someone that answers the phone? How do you end the conversation, right? How do you interact? Not with the machine. It was still two humans, but they were not in space, in the similar space, which was unique for humanity. It never happened before. In distant spaces, they were saying that we're never going to visit each other again. We're just going to stay home and things like that. But also like, how do you greet? You pick up the phone. What do you say? To this day, people are surprised at that, but there's so much variation across the planet in different languages. And what do you say when you pick up the phone? You think everybody would say hello, but that's not the case. In some languages, you say go.
Right.
Go.
Interesting.
Go where?
Go quick now.
Yeah. Go. Like, or yes, or, nothing. You just pick up and you wait for the actual caller to speak first. You see what I'm saying? There's different expectations. I think we're figuring that stuff out now with AI. I know Alexa came out 10 years ago and Siri before that, and we had IVRs for a while, but they were dumb. Now they become smarter, but we're still figuring out the new interface of talking to machines with human language, not just about a customer service, but also about like as companions, assistants for the elderly, for the doctors diagnosing, like you said, speech impediments and all that, and as an assistant that you can talk to and use that exploration that we do with human language of like, maybe I'm not exactly sure what I want to talk about, but the more I talk about it, the more it becomes crystallized in my mind that I want to take the conversation down that path and maybe even like change my mind about something, which is, we always think that the call, like going back to customer service, like my day job, we always think that there's always an expectation and intent for the caller. And we take that for granted. Like this is it. They're never going to change their intent, but often they do.
Yeah.
Callers often change intent and they just like maybe even change their mind about something. I call, to transfer, money, but in the course of the conversation, I keep thinking about like, you know what, I should just keep my money where it is. So what is a bot supposed to do, right? It's like a human would actually interrogate you a little bit. It's like, what made you change your mind? But as a designer, how do I handle the situation? That's new stuff that is coming.
Yeah.
Right. So
another thing that's interesting is along the same sort of lines. I remember Alan Nicol from Rasa. They used to have this like scale of, I don't know if it was called maturity, but it was like as AI assistants advance, they need to get better at certain things. And it was like level 1 is just responding to very basic input. Level 2 was like better intent recognition, stuff like that. And I think level 3 was around helping somebody with something that they don't explicitly know what they need. So some people might call JP Morgan and be like, look, I need to open a savings account. But some people might call and say, I'm getting a bit concerned about my retirement, or I'm thinking about trying to save for my son or my daughter's college education or whatever. Like they kind of know, roughly speaking, what their situation is, but they don't specifically know what they need from the company. And so the sort of like next thing, this is where generative AI can really help as well, is in that kind of like initial, you could probably call it a phase of classification if you want a better phrase, but it's a combination of disambiguation, consultation, and then classification to get somebody from, I'm moving house soon. Okay, so does that mean you want to port your mortgage? Do you want a new mortgage? Are you going to pay off your existing mortgage? What do you need to get them from that initial zone of ambiguity into actually being able to help them?
Yeah, no, that's exactly one of the toughest use cases that, like I said, you went on the website first, or you use your mobile app, or even chatted a little bit with an assistant, but at some point you decided to call, and you have an intent you have a goal in your mind. It's like I want to open a tuition account for my niece. Like I heard about this product. I'm calling to open it. And then, in the course of the call, you have more questions that maybe they come up. Like, okay, so when do you want? When is you expect your niece to graduate from college so she can use the fund? Right? It's like, when I was on the website, I didn't think about that. That's going to be, she's 4, it's going to be in 14 years, right? So, and then you're thinking 14 years, that's a long time. Maybe I need to give her, some help before then in high school or something like that. And then you ask, do you have any other programs that, for students for like, putting money before tax for, what I'm saying? So it's like, and, back in the, rules-based, hard-coded things, they'll be like, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Let's go back to the university tuition thing, right? But with an LLM, you can handle gracefully that situation. Maybe you don't have an answer in the knowledge, the database, but at least you keep the conversation going. I hate the word escalate. You transfer the call to a human that can help better. And that's the beauty about the telephony. That's why the call centers are still, we keep talking about data centers and the energy they're going to use, but the call center is still around. Maybe they're going to be a little smaller now with like AI, but they're still going to be around. There's still going to be, things that we want to handle by a human, whether it's your banker or your doctor. I don't think bankers and doctors are going to be replaced by AI. Maybe they will in the future, and maybe they'll be better. A robotic doctor might have better bedside manners than my current doctor, who knows? Same with bankers, that they have to look up all this information, synthesize it in the brain, and help you. Whereas an AI can just have everything at their disposal, in the speed of light. But even that delay with a banker, your human banker that, puts around on the computer and opens up some whatever, even that is part of the social cohesion between like a customer and a business, right? So we thought about the brick and mortar stores are going to go away. Guess what's going to happen tomorrow morning, Black Friday? Those stores are going to be flooded with people. So they're never going to go away. And I think it's a combination, like humans and AI. They're going to co-evolve at some point, the same way that we have 100 years now with the telephone and the video chat and everything. The ability to do these things that, again, during COVID, we thought that the office buildings will be abandoned. Everybody would just have a home office, and Manhattan now is booming. We just have a brilliant new headquarters here in Midtown that looks like a spaceship. It's amazing. I can't wait to go check it out. It looks so amazing. I like it. So you don't know. That unpredictability of the future is actually the beauty of interacting with technology and machines. And gadgets. Humans like gadgets, and we talked about Alexa, the first one was like a cylinder, and then it became a puck, and now it's a ball. Why is it changing shapes? Because we like that change. We like we like gadgets. We like, a new iPhone comes out every year, and if it's not significantly different from the previous one, we're disappointed. I just put some buttons, take some buttons out, make it a little different. We just that difference and the consistency of a brand, right? Which is a big question now for a lot of the companies. I listened to your previous podcast with the Lloyd's folks from the Lloyd's Bank. What's the voice of Lloyd's? What's the voice of Chase? What's the voice of Delta Airlines and all that stuff? Hugely important because it's a business, right? You want to identify. You have, you can be adaptable. You can adapt the voice, be empathetic, or very matter of fact or whatever. But you still want to maintain the fact that you're talking to a specific brand, which is a whole other question we can talk about. But that's something that I'm also working on, and looking at industry standards and doing some competitive research. Is one of the best use cases out there is Erica for Bank of America, which is a great rhyme with the name of the bank. And they're doing a good job, having that expectation of a caller, whether you're using the chatbot, the voice channel, or just going to the webpage and being greeted by Erica, the Bank of America assistant. So that was a brilliant naming.
Erica's been, one of the sort of early examples of giving the assistant its own identity, and the theory I had previously, and maybe we'll kind of get back to that, which is, and Capital One had Eno, do you remember? And they seem to have really dialed back on that now. When you speak to Capital One about Eno, no one wants to talk about it anymore, which is crazy, because it had Eno was on Alexa, it was the assistant that greeted you in the IVR, it was the thing that emails from Capital One would come from Eno. And then at one point, they even had this Google Chrome extension that helped you make secure payments via your Capital One account on any website. And it was Eno. And so they had this kind of situation where, I've said for a long time, and I think this is starting to become, I think, more widely recognized. People are telling me it now that Deloitte's apparently published some stuff on it, but I've been saying for a long time about the AI front door, which is that the first point of contact for customers across all of your estate is going to be mediated by AI at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And if that AI is a named entity like Erica or Eno or Chase or whatever the name is going to be, then there may well be a section of customers, and growing over time, that only ever interact with that assistant. They only ever interact with Erica or Chase or whatever the name is, because that's their preferred way of doing it. So then at what point does the thing become the brand?
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, you're right. Eno is not around anymore. Erica is around, but some of the stuff I hear is that, and some of the research that I've seen recently is that with the customers is that they, going back to the human versus AI agent, like they don't like the names of the, like, hi, I'm Erica, your virtual assistant. Like, why do you have a name?
Yeah.
You're just like an algorithm, right?
Yeah, you're a thing.
The anthropomorphizing of the assistants is something that, as kids we do it with our toys, we talk to our dolls and everything. So again, going back to my, previous analogy of the telephone being invented and the computers now becoming more and more, human-like, maybe not in physical form yet, even though I've seen some robotic things out there. Some of them, it's a little embarrassing, but some of it, maybe coming soon. I was at a Marriott recently, or I forget, what was it? Or the Mandarin, that they had a robot. It looked kind of like a service tray with like a dome at the top, but it had like eyes and it was rolling around. It was supposed to go to your room and get you towels or ice or something like that. I don't see it. I didn't see it moving around, but I'm like, hey, that's, and if it had like the Marriott bot on it, like the GenAI, maybe I could do some things like, I want to, stay a little late in my room, extend it. I don't have to like dial the phone, just talk to the thing that connects. Here in Jersey City, in New Jersey, where I live, like there's a pilot program now with like delivery little vehicles that go around the sidewalk. Delivering food for a company, kind of like the Waymo in San Francisco. I don't know if you heard of the driverless cars.
Yeah,
right?
I think I've seen examples of those little delivery robots. Yeah,
they're at first everybody was taking photos. The kids were kicking them around. They were like, everybody was stopping to look at them. Now we just weave through them. We don't even like, like it's like a given thing. And they have a little screen at the top, at the front with like little, eyes or hearts or little announcements and. They always like this, they always obey the traffic rules, always waiting. Everybody's like jaywalking. They just wait for the green light to cross. And, we just take it for granted. And they look just like box, container, like coolers on wheels. That's basically what they look like. Nothing to resemble, any human being. But those expectations will change. I think, increasingly just like the disembodied voice on the phone or on a smart speaker will increasingly like, start sipping into other devices and other technology. I just have a newborn grandniece. She's like, she was born a couple of months ago. She's 25. So she's going to get to see the 22nd century, babies that are born today. Can you imagine? She's going to be 75-year-olds at the year 2100.
Yeah.
What is the world going to be like then? And, the same way that my grandfather, who was born in 1898, got to experience getting on a plane at some point, or having a remote control, not have to getting up to like switch the dials on the radio. That was like a furniture in the middle of the living room. So if they experience that, what the newborn kids are going to experience now in the future, and how they're going to interact with those machines. That's the new interface. I think talk about vibe coding and democratizing technology now with AI. It's baby steps. I think that's a huge statement, democratizing technology. The same way that the internet let smaller companies, start businesses. I know Amazon took over at some point, but they're still like thriving and email before that. I think I got my PhD fellowship because I sent my first email in 95 to my future advisor. And, he's like, hey, that's brilliant. You found my email address. Yeah, I went to the Ohio State website and I look at the faculty listing and you were the only one that had an email in it. And I just signed up at Yahoo. I still have my Yahoo email account. And, it's like, I got at the top of the application list because I sent an email. So I think the same thing is happening now with AI. Like, you can think of it as a new wave that is coming. Whether it's going to replace other stuff or everything will, symbiotically coexist. I'm leaning more towards the latter. Phones are not going to go away. Screens are not going to go away. Dumb machines are not going to go away. I don't think anybody wants to talk to the washing machine. Maybe they will in the future, but I don't know. Like, I'd rather just press a button,
Yeah.
I still love the cars that have buttons, the dials for the temperature, and, all the new cars now just have a touch screen. I'm like, oh my God, I have to like light up the screen and find out where the temperature is. That dial is like, that skeuomorphic thing. It's like, like up, down. It's like,
it's timeless, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
timeless.
There's Billy Connolly. I don't know if you're familiar with Billy Connolly. He's a Scottish comedian, classic British comic. And he has a bit where he's complaining about, if it's not broke, don't fix it, just leave it as it is. And he does I'm going to obviously butcher it, and I can't actually remember the punchline, but he basically is complaining about the fact that when he goes to the airport, they used to have behind the check-in desks a map of the plane, and in all the seats, they had little tickets in the seats with your name on it. So if you wanted to swap seats or whatever, they'd just move your ticket from that seat and put it into that seat, and that was it. And he's like, you've got to you've got to go onto the internet, and you've got to log in, and you've got to pay money, and it's all this kind of stuff. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And that's a little bit of that, isn't it? Like with the touchscreens in the cars and so on. Some things just work, and I think that goes as well for the interaction design component. I think that as good as generative AI is at understanding language, you just can't beat a date picker, can you, for selecting a date? If there really is just a yes or no option, then why not just have some buttons for yes or no? Yes, you can still type to it and ask a question and still do whatever you need to do. But if there's some things that work, why not kind of leverage them?
Accessibility is a big issue too in customer service applications. We got to account for every caller, even the ones with speech problems. You still have to offer a touch tone, right? Yeah. Maybe obviously, you're going to use the web, you're going to use the digital app for whatever reason you decided to call. And another brilliant thing about these like new classification, intent models, they're actually superhuman. And a lot of internal tools in different companies are, gearing towards helping actually human agents understanding callers that maybe have English is not the first language, or they have a speech problem or a cognitive problem that you can actually get a live transcription. And speaking of like having an accent, the brilliance of like, online translation, like ChatGPT, you mentioned, like sometimes I switch to Greek, which is my native language, in the middle of an English sentence. And I can just combine the two languages and it just switches automatically. It doesn't, it's like magical. It's like talking to like, a polyglot, brilliant Einstein person that can answer all the questions in any language, So, but we still have to say every time you call, thanks for calling, para español, prima el nueve, right? You have to say that. And then everything switches to Spanish, and then you have to switch back to English if you can. Or, if you prefer to use the touchpad, press 9 or something like that. And then, you cannot switch back to using natural language. All that stuff with GenAI could be so seamlessly, like, and again, an expectation for the caller that, why can't I just talk to any language I want, to your assistant? Like, that's the expectation that the generation that is Gen Z and younger are going to be expecting from these, interactions, which now we're like, I'm always surprised when I cannot use a touch tone on the system because I don't want to speak out loud my account number. Maybe somebody will overhear it, or it's too noisy in here. Can I just like punch it in? What do it drives me nuts when I don't have that option, or if it's like buried down after like a bunch of retries. Yeah. Not very, user friendly.
Yeah. Yeah. Best modality for the phase of the interaction, isn't it? Right. Wicked. Maybe one last question to finish on is, there's a lot of people who are still working in NLU, really dying to work with generative AI, but haven't got there yet because their organization's not moving on it. At the same time, you've got people who know nothing other than generative AI and building GenAI agents, really don't know about NLU and all that kind of stuff from before because they've only just got into it recently. So what are some of the things for the NLU people that will absolutely definitely change when working with GenAI? And what are some of the some of the things that are not going to go away that people who've recently been building GenAI agents really should take heed of in terms of standards or best practices from conversation design that we should really keep hold of in a Gen AI world?
Yeah. I mentioned, the ability to use the different modalities, like you mentioned, don't take away the fact that I can use, there's a keypad on my phone, virtual now, not a real one, but I can still use it. And to your question, I worked, I've been around for a while, but I work with a lot of younger designers, brilliant people that have only started working in the last few years. Like they don't know a world of like vui, as we used to call it, right? Like what is, so it's a big question. I think it's a more general one. It applies to education too. Like kids that go to school now and they have these AI assistants, especially think about the ability to write an essay or the ability to understand, text if it's always explained to you by an AI. So a designer that starts working, directly with LLMs and the transformer technology that can actually, mimic, human language. There are, these systems now. They, like I said, they out of the box, they work amazingly, right? They're very eloquent, but how do you define eloquent if you don't know what it is? Which something that that's because I have a PhD in linguistics, but I also spent 10 years writing all these interactions and scripting every little thing that made my brain maybe a little bit, fried at sometimes, but it's there. That knowledge is there. And it's not easy to get if you just start, outsourcing all these, conversation devices to the LLM. So what I think it's, and the advice I give to junior designers is to still, do it at the, parallelly, right? You design, like a golden interaction or like a happy path, scripted, everything. Like it might take a while, account for all the edge cases, repairs and everything. As a side project, you may not even see the lights of the eyes of any stakeholders or any, team meetings. Just do it as a practice. The same way I still carry around a notebook and I scribble down notes. Sometimes I cannot even read what I'm writing because my handwriting has gone to but it's just like, it just helps me, remember things. So that, it's almost like, yeah. And I think it's learning how to read and write. How do we do that? It's like, we need to do that in order to be able to use the systems in a way that they're not going to deteriorate to the point that a lot of these responses that I see from AI now, they sound similar all the time and they kind of converge into like a certain mode of pleasing the user or having all these vacuous niceties. And, and then if you say, don't be so polite, like people actually say, just give it to me straight. You don't have to say all those things. But what are those things? Those things are something that we know, like growing up as social beings, we internalize them. And if you can put them on paper, you can see where they're relevant and how then the generative model can actually, approximate, right? They can approximate that interaction that we expect, from, human to human. If that's the goal, which I think, again, the jury's out, do we want machines to be completely indistinguishable from humans, right? I always bring up the example of Stephen Hawking, right? He never changed his synthetic voice to something more natural. He just kept that robotic voice that he had in the beginning because that was his identity. It's like, it was maybe a little hard to understand, but eventually you get adjusted to it and you understand him perfectly. But, that's the question too. Like, do we want the synthetic voices to be, or the interactions to be as good as humans? Or do we want to inject a little bit of that, machine-like behavior just to make sure that, to the point I was making earlier, are you a human? Are you an agent? Like, how can you tell? But at the same time, carry on a conversation, like accomplish the goal that you have these conversation markers, and the tonality is not because they sound nice. It's because they actually progress the conversation towards a goal and make things happen. Even like a simple business process, a use case that you want to accomplish. If a caller doesn't know that you're actually looking up their account and they interrupt you by asking something else instead of explaining like a little typing noise, right? The typing noise, the earcon, I was like, this is stupid. The computer's not typing anything. Yes, but it gives the caller, the information that they need, that something is happening. better wait a second to see what the body's going to say, as opposed to like going on to the next question. Same way that I'm looking at you now, nodding. At some point, you're going to interrupt me, like we're out of time or whatever, right? So this is natural, and we want to replicate it in the machine. Whether it's going to be like, a human nod, like I see you're doing now, you're obviously a human being, or a robotic nod that it's like, but I get it. I can translate that to what it means. We can find meaning in everything. Human beings are amazing. As long as there is like a common base that I know that it's, you're nodding because of that. And it's not like, it doesn't have a different meaning, which is, as a linguist, just to give you a last example, if I go like that, in Greek, that means no. Right? A lot of people don't know that, right? It's always like that in most languages. But in Greek and maybe some Bulgarian or Albanian neighboring languages, that's no, right? So that's a miscommunication there and it's between humans, right? Because of different cultural, historical things. But as the planet converges more into like a global community, we would actually celebrate those differences, right? And maybe you want to like have a digital avatar that has more of a Southern Balkan head movement, right? If you want to have that experience. So I think it's a way to preserve our diversity, but also have more, useful and helpful machines to make our lives easier and maybe more entertaining too.
Nice. Wicked. Well, Georgios, this has been absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate your time, my friend. Loads and loads of insights in there for anyone who wants to, level up in terms of their design approach. I think we covered loads of ground there, both from what's still working from the NLU days and the deterministic days to how things change in a generative AI landscape, and even beyond that, really. I think we kind of got out of customer service and into general AI design in all kinds of manners of use cases there, which is really, really good. So, yeah, really appreciate your time. It's been far too long, and we'll definitely have to do this again sometime. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Kane. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next one. Cheers now. Bye.